He could have any woman in the world, and yet he chose the one nobody looked at twice. Ethan Reynolds, the most desired bodybuilder in America, fell in love with an obese, shy, and nearly invisible woman. And when the world found out, everything turned into chaos. People laughed, sponsors abandoned him, and the press called him crazy. But what nobody knew is that she was the only one who saw what his muscles were trying to hide, a tired soul, starving for real love. And what happened next changed both their lives forever. On the illuminated stages, Ethan Reynolds was the portrait of success, a body sculpted to perfection, a face that graced magazine covers, a name that echoed in commercials and TV shows. Wherever he went, crowds formed, cell phones rose, and fake smiles tried to get close to his light. But ironically, the more he shined, the darker the world around him seemed. It's curious how fame works. It hands you the world but steals your peace. Everyone wanted a piece of him, a photo, a hug, a story to tell, but nobody wanted to know what existed behind that flawless appearance. Ethan was the kind of man who inspired thousands, but could no longer inspire himself. With each trophy won, he felt a piece of himself disappear, as if he were collecting medals to fill a bottomless hole. He smiled, posed, thanked everyone in the silence of his room, stared at the ceiling and thought, is this all there is? And when success starts to taste like nothing, the soul cries for help, even though the body seems unshakable. He was admired by everyone, loved by no one, and that was a kind of loneliness the spotlights would never show. The public saw a champion, but Ethan saw himself as a prisoner of his own image. He was hostage to a character the world demanded he play every day. The symbol of perfection, the man without weaknesses, the living example of discipline. The problem is that nobody can sustain a mask for so long without breaking inside. The price of admiration was too high. He couldn't fail, couldn't cry, couldn't be human. And in his eagerness to please, he forgot how to feel. People applauded him, but nobody listened. Every word of encouragement sounded like noise, because nobody really knew him. It was strange to be so beloved and at the same time so lonely. When he came home, the silence was deafening. No laughter, no hugs, no one who called him mine without ulterior motives. And perhaps that was the most painful point, realizing that the love he received was conditional on what he represented, not on who he was. Ethan realized that the world bowed before his body, but nobody cared about the soul he carried inside, and that, as simple as it seemed, was the kind of emptiness that neither fame nor money nor awards could fill. Deep down, Ethan just wanted something real, a look that didn't measure him, a touch that didn't judge him, a love that didn't need a stage. He was a man surrounded by everything the world considers valuable, beauty, prestige, power, but starving for something that can't be bought. It's curious, isn't it? How so many people seek to be seen, while he just wanted to be invisible for a day. He wanted to walk the streets without curious looks, without being reduced to that body sculpted through pain and discipline. Sometimes he envied ordinary people, the freedom to make mistakes, the lightness of not having to prove anything to anyone. Ethan lived in prison in his own glory, and each flash was like a golden cage. Nobody saw it, but he was already tired, exhausted from living a character the world loved, but that he hated being. The truth is that behind the champion of the stages, there existed a broken man, afraid of never again knowing what it was to be genuinely loved. He could barely imagine that this answer was about to emerge, in a place where nobody would recognize him, and in the eyes of a woman who would never have space in his world of appearances. While Ethan was the center of the spotlights, Sarah lived in the shadows. She worked at a simple neighborhood gym, with a metallic sound of weights mixed with the smell of sweat and disinfectant. She arrived before everyone and left after the last student locked the door. She cleaned every corner with the same care of someone taking care of something sacred, even knowing nobody noticed. She was an obese woman with a discreet walk, who preferred silence to the risk of being noticed. Loose clothing hid a body that society taught her to hate, and downcast eyes revealed the invisible weight of someone who had grown accustomed to hearing muffled laughter and cruel comments. Sarah avoided mirrors, not out of vanity, but out of fear of seeing herself. She carried in her gestures the shyness of someone who had been hurt many times, by looks, by words, by absences. But there was something about her that few perceived, a delicacy in her way of existing. Even without being seen, she saw everything. She knew who faked strength, who smiled out of habit, who cried in hiding. It was as if anonymity had given her a gift, the ability to see the truth where nobody else looked. Sarah was the type of person the world ignores, but who carries a silent light within. While athletes boasted about their bodies and compared themselves in front of mirrors, she was content taking care of what others left behind. Each towel collected, each coffee served, was a way to remain useful in a place that offered her no recognition. But she didn't complain. She never complained. She had learned early on that those who talk too much are judged, and those who feel too much are ridiculed. So she just did. She did with her heart, with that sweetness that seemed to contradict the world's cynicism. Perhaps that's why, even invisible, there was something different about her presence, a kind of peace not found in people seeking applause. Sarah sought nothing more than to survive in silence, without bothering anyone, without calling attention. But life has a curious way of bringing opposites together. While she tried to disappear, someone was beginning, little by little, to see her. And that someone was precisely the one who lived most being seen. Everyone at the gym saw her only as the cleaning lady. Nobody knew her last name, her dreams, her pain. To them, Sarah was part of the furniture, useful, but invisible. And yet, there was a hidden beauty in the way she occupied that space. There was tenderness in her gestures, an almost ancient sensitivity, the kind that time seems to have erased in modern people. While others competed for attention, Sarah stood out for her kindness. She remembered students' names, knew who took coffee without sugar, who liked the towel folded on the treadmill. Small things that seemed insignificant, but that, added together, revealed a rare soul. The world, distracted by appearance, never realized that there existed a woman with an immense heart, tired, but still capable of loving. And perhaps it was precisely that silent sweetness that was beginning to catch the attention of someone unlikely, someone who, until then, only knew the shine of stages and had never paid attention to the shine that comes from the gaze of those who serve without being seen. Ethan always believed he had seen everything, the best and worst of people. He was used to fake smiles, bought compliments, hollow promises. But in that small neighborhood gym, something began to bother him differently. He saw Sarah every day, moving silently between the dumbbells and treadmills, always with the same serene look, the same contained manner. And although the world around seemed to ignore her, Ethan couldn't look away. It was curious how she managed to remain sweet, even surrounded by indifference. There was a delicacy in her gestures, an inexplicable calm in her voice. While others mocked her, laughing at her body, the loose clothes, the shyness, she just smiled, without returning hatred, without defending herself. Ethan watched and thought, how can someone be so kind in a place that only returns cruelty? That disconcerted him, because he knew that if he were in her place, he would have exploded. Sarah seemed to carry a strength that didn't come from the body, but from the soul. And it was then that, for the first time, Ethan felt something that didn't come from vanity or desire. It came from admiration. As days went by, he began to notice details that before had gone unnoticed. The way she offered coffee to those who arrived tired, the care in not interrupting conversations, the habit of smiling even when someone mistreated her. There was a silent nobility in everything she did. Ethan, used to living surrounded by people seeking recognition, was surprised by that woman who sought nothing. She seemed satisfied just doing good, as if her mere presence was already an act of generosity. While he displayed muscles and awards, Sarah displayed something time couldn't destroy, genuine kindness. And that disarmed him, because, for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel admired. He felt small, human. He realized there was more strength in that wounded heart than in all the trophies he had ever won. And he began to think that perhaps true greatness wasn't in the body, but in the ability to keep loving the world, even when the world insists on despising you. Little by little, Ethan began to observe the gym through a new lens. Where before he saw only training and competition, now he saw emotional stories happening in silence. Insecure looks, interrupted dreams, and people trying, each in their own way, to belong to something. But nobody impressed him as much as Sarah. She was the antithesis of everything he knew. An obese woman without vanity, without status, but with a light that seemed to resist any darkness. And the more he saw her, the more he felt something change inside himself. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a kind of recognition, as if he saw in her what he himself had lost. Sarah, without realizing it, began to heal an old wound in Ethan, being valued only for his exterior. He, who had always been applauded for his body, now found himself enchanted by someone who made him want to be just human. And he barely knew that this simple admiration was about to transform into something that would challenge everything the world expected of him. It was an ordinary late afternoon, one of those when the sun sets tired, tinting the sky a melancholic orange. Ethan had finished his workout and was walking distracted through the gym corridors when he heard loud, mocking laughter echoing near the locker rooms. It was some clients making fun of something, and among the laughter, he heard Sarah's name. Look at the fat girl. She probably ate the entire protein powder inventory, they said, cackling. He stopped. Something inside him became uncomfortable, but he still didn't know exactly what. He followed the sound of voices until silence took over. That's when he saw her. Sarah was sitting on the floor in the back of the gym, with her hands covering her face, trying to muffle her crying. It was contained pain, the kind of pain that makes no noise, but weighs in the air like an invisible scream. Ethan was paralyzed. He, who had so many times ignored humiliations directed at others, now found himself unable to turn away. There was something in that moment that pierced him. Perhaps the injustice, perhaps the raw humanity he had forgotten to feel. The image of her crying was engraved in his mind like a scar that refuses to close. For an instant, Ethan wanted to approach, say something, offer comfort, but he stood there motionless, watching that woman who, despite so many wounds, still had a silent dignity. Sarah didn't scream, didn't complain, didn't try to defend herself. She just breathed deeply, trying to recompose a little pride she had left before returning to work. It was then that Ethan realized the abyss between the two worlds that inhabited the same space. He, surrounded by applause, had never had to deal with this kind of humiliation. She, surrounded by indifference, lived this every day, and even so, kept smiling. That realization hit him hard. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something real, empathy, and with it came a strange feeling of shame. Shame for having been part of a world that ignored people like Sarah, for having closed his eyes so many times to others' pain. Her crying seemed like a mirror showing the emptiness he himself carried. It was as if, in that instant, life forced him to see what really mattered. And, unexpectedly, he felt a sincere desire to protect that woman the world insisted on despising. When Sarah realized someone was approaching, she quickly wiped her tears and tried to disguise it. "Everything's fine," she murmured, without looking at him. But Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stood there in silence, trying to find words that wouldn't sound empty. For the first time, he didn't know what to say, and that, coming from someone used to speeches and spotlights, was new. So he simply sat beside her, unhurried, without trying to fix anything. And that gesture, simple and unpretentious, was more powerful than any words. As time passed, the noise of equipment decreased, and the world seemed to slow down. There was a weight in the air, but also a strange calm, as if two tired souls had recognized each other. Ethan couldn't explain it, but something inside him had changed. He didn't feel pity. He felt respect, and deep down a kind of admiration that scared him, because it was pure, without desire, without interest. It was the beginning of something he had never felt before, the desire to truly know someone. And although he didn't know it, that moment would mark the beginning of the truest story of his life. In the following days, Ethan found himself noticing small details he would never have perceived before. The way Sarah arranged towels carefully, how she treated students with kindness, even those who ignored her. She didn't seek attention. She seemed to live in a world apart, guided by a serenity that disarmed any arrogant look. Ethan began to notice that her presence, once invisible, now attracted him like a discreet magnet. And the most curious thing was that he, used to being the center of attention, found himself trying to understand that woman who didn't look at her with admiration or interest, just with naturalness. That disconcerted him. Sarah never treated him like a celebrity, never seemed impressed by his muscles, fame, or money. When she spoke with him, her voice was calm, without effort to please. And it was precisely that respectful indifference that awakened something in him. It was as if, finally, someone saw him without the filter of vanity. And for the first time in years, Ethan began to feel the desire to be just an ordinary man. One morning, he waited for the moment when she had coffee alone in the gym's small kitchenette. He approached, nervous, with a cup in his hands. He didn't know why he was nervous, but he felt he needed to be there. "May I sit?" he asked, trying to hide his hesitation. Sarah raised her eyes and nodded with a slight smile. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. They talked about trivial things, the weather, the gym's activity, workouts. But there was a strange lightness in that dialogue, as if both knew they were stepping on delicate ground, about to become important. Ethan began to laugh at simple things, to speak without thinking about how he looked. Sarah gradually allowed herself to relax. What began as a simple coffee became a habit. And in each conversation, Ethan discovered one more fragment of her soul. The woman who read old novels, who liked to cook on Sundays, who dreamed of opening a small bakery. And the more he listened to her, the more he realized that, for the first time, someone was talking to him without expecting anything in return. It was a type of connection that scared him and, at the same time, freed him. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan began to miss her when he didn't see her. Sometimes he made up excuses to go to the gym off hours, just to cross paths with Sarah for a few minutes. He himself didn't understand what was happening. Was it an attraction? A feeling? Or just the need to feel human again? Maybe it was all of that together. The fact is that Sarah made him remember who he was before fame, before contracts and poses. By her side, he didn't need to prove anything. There were no mirrors, just presence. And gradually, Ethan began to shed character. He returned to laughing sincerely, eating without guilt, allowing himself to be vulnerable. It was as if, around that woman the world despised, he found what it searched for most: peace. And the most ironic thing of all is that Sarah didn't even imagine the impact she was having. For her, Ethan was just a kind man, and that was enough. But what both still didn't know was that this silent bond would soon be put to the test in a brutal way. Sarah always saw him as just another trainer. Kind, polite, perhaps a bit mysterious, but ordinary. Ethan, for his part, never introduced himself any other way. Deep down, he liked the feeling of anonymity, of being able to walk beside her without the weight of spotlights, without needing to be the champion. It was curious how her world and his world seemed to exist in parallel dimensions. While Sarah fought daily against looks of contempt, malicious comments, and the mirror that so many times returned a hard-to-accept image, Ethan tried to free himself from his own reflection, inflated by vanity and expectations. Both, in different ways, were trying to survive versions of themselves that no longer represented them. And it was precisely at this point of vulnerability that their souls met, like two puzzle pieces nobody imagined could fit together. When Ethan told stories about his other gym, Sarah imagined he worked part-time in some fancier neighborhood, never suspecting that that other gym was actually the headquarters of one of the largest chains in the country, with his face stamped on every billboard. She talked about her days with simplicity: the crowded bus, the overdue rent, the boss who yelled when the coffee ran out. And Ethan listened to everything with an almost childlike attention, as if wanting to learn what it was to truly live. Sarah, unknowingly, was teaching him lessons no money could buy, about patience, dignity, and resilience. He began to realize how cruel life was to those who didn't fit the standards, and how her kindness was, in reality, an act of daily courage. And the closer he got, the more he felt ashamed of the man he had been until then. Arrogant, egocentric, and empty. That giant of the stages was beginning to bow before the invisible greatness of a simple woman who didn't even know how much she was transforming him. One afternoon, while they walked together to the bus stop, Sarah invited him to see the small room where she lived. Ethan accepted without hesitation. The place was modest: a narrow bed, worn curtains, and the smell of freshly baked cake. "I like to bake when I'm sad," she confessed, embarrassed. He laughed. touched by the simple honesty of that phrase. They sat at the table, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt at home. Nothing there was luxurious, but everything was genuine. The warmth, the laughter, the comfortable silence. In that instant, he understood he was living something that could never be bought or manufactured for cameras. It was real, raw, and imperfect, and it was there, in that simplicity, that Ethan realized the size of the secret he carried. He knew that, sooner or later, Sarah would discover who he was. And deep down, what scared him most wasn't losing her for lying, but losing the only person who loved him without knowing the size of his name. Love, when it's true, doesn't arrive with fireworks or rehearsed promises. It infiltrates small gestures, the way someone listens to you, the silence that comforts, the laughter that disarms. That's exactly how it happened with Ethan. Without realizing it, he began to wait for Sarah every day, for the sound of the bucket sliding across the floor, for the aroma of the coffee she prepared, for the shy brightness of her eyes when she saw him arrive. He, who before was surrounded by women who desired him for his appearance, discovered the pleasure of being noticed by someone who saw his essence. And the more time passed, the more he realized the abyss between the man the world saw and who he really was. Sarah didn't see the magazine idol. She saw only Ethan, the man who sometimes got confused, who made mistakes, who needed to learn to love. And perhaps that's what touched him most. The fact that she didn't want to fix him, didn't demand anything, didn't put him on a pedestal. She just accepted him. And that kind of love, the rarest of all, is the one that gives you back the courage to be who you are. One night, after an exhausting workout, Ethan stayed alone in the gym, sitting on the cold floor, mentally reviewing each moment beside Sarah. It was as if her image mixed with the sound of falling weights, with the memory of applause, with the voices of fame that now sounded empty. He understood that what he felt wasn't simple admiration. It was love, but not an idealized love, the kind shown on social media. It was something that came from the soul, a feeling that made him small before the greatness of a woman the world ignored. Ethan realized that his entire life had been built on a lie, that success and beauty were enough. Now, remembering Sarah's smile, the way she listened without judgment, he felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know if he had the courage to confess what he felt, because loving her meant challenging everything he had learned, the standards, the pride, the fear of others' laughter, but at the same time, denying that love was denying himself. And he could no longer stand living pretending. From that moment on, Ethan began to change. Almost imperceptibly, his gaze softened, his tone of voice lost its arrogance, and even his workouts became more human. He began to train with purpose, not out of vanity. He no longer cared so much about the mirror, but about the reflection he saw in Sarah's eyes. He was a man rediscovering the meaning of being strong. And life's irony is that the same body that made him famous now became small before the immensity of feelings that inhabited him. Ethan began to write notes he never had the courage to deliver. Simple phrases like, "You make me feel good," or "I feel at peace when I'm with you." He kept them in his backpack, as if they were small secrets that protected him. He knew he was falling in love, and there was no turning back. But he also knew that when the truth came to light about who he was, about what he was hiding, everything could crumble. Still, he chose to feel. And that choice, silent and brave, was a first step towards something that would change both their lives forever. The news fell like a storm on a sunny day. Ethan, used to flashes, interviews, and paparazzi, had never felt so exposed. But this time it wasn't about muscles or titles. It was about Sarah. Newspapers printed cruel phrases, headlines that ridiculed her body, insinuating that a man so handsome and famous should never love someone outside the standards. Social media exploded with malicious comments, cruel memes, and merciless judgments. Ethan found himself facing reality that fame couldn't protect him from. Human prejudice, brutal and ignorant. He felt rage, helplessness, but mainly fear. Fear that the world would destroy the only true thing he found in years, Sarah's silent love. She, for her part, read some of those comments and felt her heart tighten. She had always been used in malicious comments, but now it wasn't just about her. It was Ethan who would be judged, and she didn't want to be responsible for his pain. So she decided to distance herself. That gesture of protection and insecurity, hurt more than any public criticism she had ever received. Sarah disappeared from the gym routine, and Ethan felt her absence as if it were a physical void. Every corner seemed to echo the lack of her presence. He thought about all the conversations, the exchanged looks, the smiles they shared silently, and wondered how someone could hate something so genuine and simple. The world seemed inhuman in the face of such a pure feeling. Ethan now faced a different battle, not against weights or opponents, but against society's ingrained prejudice and the fear of losing the one who had saved him from himself. He mentally revisited each of her gestures, each phrase, each moment when Sarah made him feel he could be human, vulnerable, and loved without needing applause. And the pain of not being able to protect her from others' malice seemed to consume every muscle he had trained his entire life. For the first time, fame didn't help. On the contrary, exposure made everything crueler. And deep down, Ethan realized he needed to act, but how? The decision couldn't wait. He called a press conference, something he had never imagined doing because of a relationship. Standing before the cameras, he felt the weight of critical looks, flashes, and voices ready to judge. But this time, he wasn't there for himself. He was there for Sarah, for who really mattered. With a firm voice and eyes fixed on the journalist, he said words that shocked and moved simultaneously. You can laugh at her body, but she was the one who healed the soul my muscles couldn't sustain. Silence filled the room. Critics fell silent. The audience was stunned. And in that instant, Ethan didn't just offend Sarah, but also freed himself from the prison of vanity and fear that success had imposed. He showed the world that true love isn't measured by appearances, status, or social standards. The courage of a famous man defending a woman the world ignored began to make news not because of scandal, but because of the strength of genuine feeling. And even knowing the road ahead would still have challenges, Ethan had made a decision. He wouldn't let anyone, not even public opinion, steal the person who had changed his life forever. Months passed since that historic press conference, and the world slowly began to understand the depth of the love that united Ethan and Sarah. He, who for years lived surrounded by empty applause and looks interested only in the surface, decided it was time to change his life. Competitions, million-dollar contracts, flashes, and magazines no longer had the same value they once had. What mattered now was something purer, more meaningful, the possibility of impacting real lives. Inspired by the love he felt for Sarah, Ethan planned and inaugurated a completely free rehabilitation center where people of all ages and conditions could find care, support, and hope. He wanted the center to bear her name, not to exalt fame or beauty, but to eternalize the essence of a woman who transformed his life with kindness and simplicity. Each painted wall, each acquired equipment, each chosen employee reflected the respect and admiration Ethan felt for Sarah. And as he watched the first group of people arriving to receive help, he realized that finally his muscular strength had found a greater purpose: sustaining lives, healing souls, and spreading dignity. Sarah, for her part, felt something she had never experienced so intensely: confidence and belonging. That woman who before hid, shy and obese, now walked through the center with her head held high, receiving looks of respect and gratitude. People who might never have noticed her now looked at her with silent admiration, but she didn't need that to feel powerful. Ethan's love, constant and unconditional, had shown her that her true beauty was in the courage to exist without masks, in the kindness she carried even when nobody applauded, in the invisible strength she had carried for so long. She finally learned that life rewards those who persist in being genuine, even in the face of contempt or invisibility. Each of her gestures, each of her words, now carried a light that illuminated not only the rehabilitation center, but also the hearts of those who needed hope. And Ethan, always by her side, saw that transformation grow each day, remembering how small actions and sincere love can alter entire destinies. The world that before judged and criticized now watched with curiosity, and many began to question their own prejudices. Real stories of overcoming and kindness, embodied in that unlikely couple, began to circulate, inspiring thousands. Ethan and Sarah became a silent symbol, not because of fame or wealth, but because of something much deeper. Proof that true love sees beyond appearance, that a person's beauty lies in courage, empathy, and the ability to transform lives. Each visit to the center, Each smile that appeared on previously discouraged patients reminded them that human choices could be powerful, that true greatness isn't measured in medals or muscles, but in generosity and compassion. Sarah finally understood that being truly seen by someone is an experience that surpasses any applause or superficial praise. And Ethan discovered that the man who thought he was incomplete, empty inside, could indeed become complete beside someone who loved him without measure, without judgment, with the silent intensity of someone who knows the value of the soul. Together, they had created not just a rehabilitation center, but a legacy of love and humanity, proving that life always holds surprises for those who have the courage to see beyond appearances. Sarah's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. The obese woman who hid in loose clothes and looks of contempt now walked with confidence, full of pride in her own story. Each gesture, each word, was loaded with the courage that had sustained her through years of silence and invisibility. And Ethan was by her side, not as an imposing protector, but as someone who truly loved her, who admired her invisible strength and was moved by her simplicity. Together, they proved that life has a curious way of balancing justice and love. While the world tries to judge, true affection grows silent, resistant, and luminous. Sarah learned that she didn't need others' approval to be happy, that the most important validation comes from those who see you with an open heart. And Ethan realized that his greatest victory wasn't in medals or titles, but in having someone who loved him for who he was, without filters or expectations. That understanding transformed them both, making them not just partners, but also allies in a greater mission, to show that true humanity resides in empathy and generosity. The Rehabilitation Center became a meeting point not just for people seeking physical health, but for emotional stories that previously went unnoticed. Patients arrived with fear, pain, and distrust, and left inspired by Ethan and Sarah's example. Two people who had lived through cruel criticism and still chose to believe in the best in each other. Each hug given, each word of encouragement exchanged, was a reminder that life can be transformed by love and kindness. Sarah, who always believed she had no value because of her appearance, discovered that her strength came from her essence, from the way she touched people with delicacy and attention. And Ethan, who spent years seeking external recognition, finally understood that true greatness is in what can't be seen, in the silent impact one has on the lives of those who need hope. Together, they built a space where judgment had no place, and where difference, vulnerability, and humanity were celebrated. Today, Ethan and Sarah walk side by side, aware that life offered them something rare. The opportunity to love without fear, to be seen and understood deeply. Each challenge faced, each criticism ignored, strengthened their relationship, making them an example of courage and authenticity. The obese woman who once felt invisible is now a symbol of resistance and genuine beauty, and the famous bodybuilder who could have any woman discover that true wealth is in the heart. They show the world that love isn't about perfect bodies, titles, or fame, but about finding someone who sees what nobody else sees, who values essence over surface, and who is willing to walk together even when society tries to separate them. And as they smile between embraces and knowing looks, the world seems to finally remember what true love is, the kind capable of healing invisible wounds, transforming lives, and leaving an eternal mark, not on muscles, but on the soul. This story reminds us that what really matters is never an appearance or status, but in people's essence and the courage to see beyond the superficial. How many times have you let yourself be guided by others' judgments or internal fears, without realizing the value of who's by your side? Ethan and Sarah show us that true greatness is in empathy, genuine love, and the ability to transform lives with simple, silent, but powerful gestures. So look around you, value what's invisible, and allow yourself to be seen for who you really are. And if you want to keep learning from inspiring stories full of life lessons, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because each story here is an opportunity to change the way you love, live, and connect with the world.